Welcome back to the podcast. We're here with Joe Dillon from Equitable Mediation. I have not had a divorce or separation mediator on the show before, and I thought it was about time. It's a disservice to my audience. A lot of my listeners, unfortunately, are they get to the place where they cannot continue. And I've seen families destroyed by very contested litigations when a talented mediator would be a godsend to save not just finances but sanity between the couple. And I'm excited to talk to Joe Dillon about it today. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, John. Looking forward to our conversation.
So you've been at this for 18 years, is that right?
Yeah, 18 years private practice, 30 years as a professional negotiator.
And tell me a little bit about, why you have a resource or your website, equitablemediation.com, lots of blogs, lots of information. You don't practice in every state in the country. I think you practice in 6 states. Is that right?
Yep. Yep.
So there's a lot
Sets.
of people who can gain benefit from what you're doing that aren't even able to hire you. Why do you feel that you've taken on this pursuit of educating people? Why is it so important to you?
Well, as a kid, I grew up in a household where there was a litigated divorce. And this is back in the 80s where mediation really wasn't very well known or widely accepted as a conflict resolution process. And I'm an only child, so I remember living with my mom, and my mom had this envelope that she would put money into. What she was doing, I later come to learn, is she was saving up enough money to buy 1 hour of her lawyer's time. And she had a pad that she would carry around with her, leave it out on the kitchen counter. You know, you're a kid, you have eyes, you can read. And I could see that she was writing down all these questions that she had so that when she saved up enough money, she could go get an hour of time and she would bombard this poor lawyer with questions. Now, part of the reason I knew this is that she would take me to the lawyer's office, which for listeners is really kind of a no-no. And I grew up in probably more of an example of what not to do. Litigated divorce. I sat in the back of the courtroom. I went to the lawyer's offices. Not a lot of fun for a kid. Be it as it may, I watched her struggle with information. And when I started the practice, I thought to myself, well, I'm just going to give freely. I saw what it did to my mom and how she was unable to get the help she really desperately needed because she couldn't afford it. So since 2007, we started blogging, which is, if you know, in the blogosphere, that's actually pretty early in the game. And we were just writing articles on mediation, on divorce, on alimony, child support, parenting, you name it, whatever we could think of people, situations. And now here it is, gosh, nearly 20 years later. And the Resource Center has grown to be blogs, checklists, podcasts, video courses, you name it. And it's all just basically all free for people to take and enjoy. Enjoy might be the wrong word, but if you live anywhere in the United States, the information there applies. They just want people to feel like just because I can't afford it doesn't mean I can't get accurate information, which in this day and age, I have to tell you, is really hard to come by out there. A lot of our clients now are coming into session with, they read on AI that this is what the law says in their state. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to entertain that because that's not true or correct. But we want you to have a reputable source that you can go to. So certainly that's how it all started. It was kind of born of my childhood experience.
For people who don't know what the mediation process looks like or even what it is, let's back it up for a second. So in a mediation, you are a neutral third party, not representing either side, the husband or the wife, correct?
Right. Correct. Absolutely.
And so who is a good fit for mediation and who is not?
Certainly. Really, anyone can mediate if they want to. So the key to mediation is because it's a voluntary process, you need to be willing to be engaged. Part of that is you both need to show up on time. You need to be in the process. You need to provide information when asked. I'm not using the courts or the legal system to extract information from you like a lawyer might take a deposition, or there might be some sort of request for tax returns that have to get
Right.
approved by a judge. So folks who come to us are of all shapes and sizes. We've had short-term marriages. We've had uh, individuals who through confidentiality processes I can't name because they're folks you may have seen on your television, and athletes, musicians, people we've worked with. these cases span from dollars to hundreds of millions of dollars. But at the end of the day, the one thing they all have in common is they want to get through the process without involving lawyers, without involving the court system, and they want to be empowered to make their own decisions. That's, to me, is the number one driver. You want to be engaged, you want to be active. Absolutely, mediation is great for you. Now, on the flip side, those who cannot mediate, there's a couple of the obvious ones, right? Substance abuse, mental health issues, domestic violence. These are cases where mediation, unfortunately, isn't going to be an option, given that you're both going to be either in the same room or on the same Zoom and connecting and having to interface. But also people where trust is an issue, they're not willing to fully disclose. I have had cases where during a initial meeting, for example, someone's like, well, why do you need that? Why do you need that? Do I really have to give that to you? And then I write a nice, polite email afterwards. Thank you for your time. I really don't think we're a good fit. Those folks, I know they're going to need the power of the legal system behind them in order to extract that information and get those decisions. So, really, as we always say, pretty much anyone can mediate if they're willing and able to do so.
Okay. And if you have one person who wants to mediate and the other person who's not willing, you're just kinda that's it. That's you're out of luck with that.
Yeah, it is hard. We also it's never our job to convince anyone, of course, but we can make a compelling case. And for those individuals, if you've got someone in your life like that, what I'd say, first of all, in our resource center, there is an article on what we call the reluctant spouse. There's always going to be, and from your profession, John, and from mine, there's usually one person who is much further down the line in the divorce decision. In fact, statistics have shown there's a law firm in the UK that does a survey every year, and it's barristers. So they ask their clients who their family law, and they say, how long was it since you first got this inkling that I might maybe thinking possibly want to end my marriage to you setting foot in our office? And the answer was 2 years and 1 month. So over 2 years, it took them from planting the seed of this might be over
Yeah,
to, yes, I need to hire someone. That means invariably the other person might be blindsided, shocked. They might have had an inclination. So there are ways to talk to them. So you could certainly check out that article in our resource center. But
sure.
also, if you get on a call with me, my explanation is the same. You're getting a divorce whether you want to or not. It simply becomes a matter of how you go through the process, right? It takes two to
Yep,
be married, only takes one to file for divorce, and ultimately you will be divorced. So you can either litigate, spend a couple $100,000, 2 3 years, hate each other, or you can mediate, spend a couple $1,000s, couple of months, and at least, especially if you have kids, try to keep your relationship amicable and intact as you can.
yeah, for sure. By the way, it's 6 years before people come into couples therapy on average.
So
I
there
don't
you go, right? I mean, of course, because you know that there's that one person, I'm sure, right, John? You've got that one person who's been wanting it, wanting it, wanting it, and finally the
yeah,
other person comes
that
along.
person is called the wife.
Yes,
So
you're right. 70% of all divorces are filed by women.
yeah,
Absolutely true.
for sure. Okay, so you mentioned timelines and
Yeah.
expense. I think, a lot of people who listen to this and are hearing it, would love to hear you have an interesting way to practice. I'll let you explain it compared to other mediators. I think it's
Yeah.
great. It's one of the reasons why I invited you on. But I also want people to understand how long this actually takes, kind of rough costs and, just get an accurate picture in their head of what they're getting themselves into.
Certainly. So I can lead. Most people think I'll get an attorney. The lawyers have done an excellent job of convincing people that they need a lawyer.
Yeah,
Now, when we think about the legal system, and I won't go too far off a field here, but there's really two types of law. There's criminal and family. That's kind of how I think of it. And there's other types, of course, but in the simple parlance, when we think of criminal, we think of shows like CSI and Law and Order and all that stuff, where we all know it's wrong to shoot somebody. I think we can all agree on that, and therefore you get a lawyer to prosecute the case, and yes, you're bad, you go to jail. In family, it's a court of equity. It's not a court of laws. It's a court of what's fair. Well, who knows what's fair, right? Who's going to decide that? A judge, a lawyer? Really, I believe the client couple knows what's fair and best for them in their situation. So if you're hiring lawyers, what's a lawyer's job? And this is, by the way, kudos to lawyers. I'm actually paying them a compliment. Is that if I hire a lawyer and my spouse hires a lawyer, what's that lawyer's job? is to fight for their client and get their client everything they can and give up as little as they can. So guess what? You've got one of those, your spouse has one of those. And what does that result in? It results in a constant headbutting over literally 2 to 3 years. This is billed by the hour. Of course, the lawyers are going to fight for everything you want. As you get into it, of course, we all get amped up. Well, how dare they say that about me? We have to write another letter. I want a hearing, dot, dot, dot. And they're, of course, that's what they're trained to do and more than happy to do so and should do that. That's what a good lawyer does. But I've had family members, I've had my own parents who've litigated, I've seen others. A litigated divorce is gonna run between one and $200,000. This is not me just pulling a number out of the air. This is the Wall Street Journal who releases a study on this. And people are like, "That's preposterous." Yes, because it takes 2 to 3 years to unwind,
And
to go to court.
let me
Yeah,
just clarify, when you're
yeah,
saying into 200,
yeah.
that's legal fees, not like what
Yes,
you lose because you're giving spousal support or
of
anything like that.
course.
That's
Yeah.
just the legal fees, right?
Just the legal fees, absolutely. You start bringing in the experts. Now I bring in an employability expert, $25,000. I bring in a forensic accountant because I don't believe you that our checking account $15,000. And
Right.
that's what starts happening. So the legal fees do pile up and the time piles up. And then we all know what you do, what I do. We're human beings. It impacts us. It impacts our work performance. It impacts our ability to parent our children, to be a good friend. These are years of our lives we're not getting back. On the flip side, when you go into mediation, now I can't speak for all mediators because, as you mentioned, we are a little unique in this sense. Our process takes about 3 months. We have a process by which we put people through a guided mediation in which we give them steps, we give them homework, we meet in an organized fashion. We try to remove all the emotion from it and we focus on getting a solution that's going to be beneficial to both parties. I'm a neutral. I'm advocating for both of you. I want both of you to have an outcome that you're pleased with. It's not my job to pick a side. It's my job to help you move forward. So rather than hundreds of thousands, you're talking thousands of dollars, and to give your listeners an idea of, we had a client, they owned a multinational corporation with locations in 8 separate countries. They had, I think, 3 kids. They were a high conflict couple and their entire divorce cost $12,000. And that's the most expensive mediation we've ever had because they were high conflict. We had to get business values. We had to do all these things. And certainly there are other costs, to file and, a couple hundred for the court fees and stuff, right? But at the end of the day, we wrapped it up in about 3 months, maybe 4 months. And they were better off for it because I want them to spend the money on their kids, on their family, on their business, not in wasted legal fees. And they were friendly at the end of it, right? I won't say they're probably not going to be hanging out having dinner, but they worked together in the company, so they were able to continue to work together because we also preserved that relationship. And so that's part of it. And what you had mentioned about how at Equitable Mediation, what we do is we don't limit the number of sessions we give clients. That's a little unusual because when you think about the model, the legal model, it's tend to be billed by the hour or billed by the session. We do a flat fee and we say, look, if you follow our process and you do as we say, this is what it's going to cost, no surprises. And if it goes more than that, it's on us, right? It's, we put it out there. This is what we're confident in. And that, I think, John, takes the pressure off the client by not worrying like, oh my God, we only have an hour left with this guy. We gotta make a decision.
Yeah.
A rushed decision is a bad decision, and we all know that. So
Yeah. So interesting. And so you probably have to kind of understand before you can even quote a price, you have to understand like how many financial assets are there children involved to be able to understand how much time is
yeah,
involved. But you gave the ceiling there, which was super helpful. For those of people who don't know, I live in Los Angeles, my office in Calabasas. I've heard attorney retainers of 20,000. So, like the idea that you can get the whole thing done both sides for 12 and be done when you have a multinational corporation is kind of a joke. Okay, great. What are the typical, hiccups and let's say you have 2 people and they come
right.
to you and they want to do mediation. Where do you find it snags and people go, "I knew we shouldn't have done this. This is a waste of time." Like, where does that happen more often than not?
Yeah, so there's a couple of common pitfalls. The first one is a phrase I use that says, "Do the discovery before the deciding." People come in, they have it all figured out. We've talked. Here's what we're going to do. Okay, I'm not here to step on any toes, blow up any deals. My job, much like you, John, is to ask a lot of questions and elicit information from our clients. I start asking questions, not to be a nosy neighbor, not to poke around, not to upset the apple cart. I'm simply wanting to understand how they arrived at these decisions. As I start exploring and I get discovery, meaning financial information, budgets, balance sheets, tax returns, pay stubs, all those common things, bank statements, I start asking questions and saying, well, did you give any thought to blank? And then usually one of the parties will look at me and go, actually, I never thought of that. To which the other party replies, hey, wait a minute. We had a deal. You can't change your mind. Well, guess what? You can change your mind. In light of new information, of course you can change your mind. And so that's probably the number one place where people go wrong. They come in claiming they have it all figured out, thinking they've got it all set. I start gathering information and asking questions, and it upsets them. So that's number one. The other place where people go wrong is when you've got a situation where someone's reluctant for financial disclosure. And I'm not doing a full, deep dive on you. The stuff I'm asking for is not like crazy, crazy stuff. It's tax returns and pay stubs and stuff that should be readily available. But when I start noticing the pattern and an unwillingness to disclose, there's definitely something deeper. And usually in those cases, you've either got a narcissistic spouse or you've got somebody who is perhaps, shall we say, walking the tightrope in terms of financial legalities, in the way they file
Right.
taxes or the way they
Sure.
invest money. And the other party is just sort of, well, they're trusting them. They're going along. Well, of course, my wife, my husband, of course, they know what they're doing. No problem. And then when I start asking questions and I start revealing the cracks and the other person starts to understand it, that's usually when they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea you drained our 401k to invest in a, llama farm in Zimbabwe, right? It's like, these are the things that crop up. And that's when also mediation can go wrong, when there's not full disclosure. And then I come along and find the fissure, if you will, and
Yep.
that tends to upset the cart. So those are the two big ones.
Right. So surprise is one of the biggest ones in a short
Surprise.
word, like,
Right.
"Oh, I didn't know we had as little or as much money or as, complications that we have."
Yeah.
How do you handle, you know, what's it called? Maintenance or alimony and parenting, agreements in terms of visitation or custody? How does that work in the mediation that might be different than in the courts?
Yeah. So we always are, our goal always is kids first. When children are involved, right? Along the way, somehow we all became adults, and our job now is to be that adult and put our kids' needs first. And no matter what state you practice in, the courts are pretty clear about this. The courts would have you live in a cardboard box if it meant that your kids could have a roof over their head and they lived in a house, right? They're not concerned about you and your vacations or your hobbies or your new sports car. And so when we come into these parenting plan approaches to start with parenting and with anything, we use a reality-based approach. And I know that sounds odd because you're like, well, what do you mean? A lot of folks come in with a very specific thing in their head. They've done some reading, they've talked to their friends, their brother-in-law's college old roommate got this, and that's difficult. That's difficult to undo. So we start by talking about their situation. What's realistic? What's your life look like? What do your kids do? What are their activities? What's your work schedule? Where do you work? How far from home? And then what winds up happening is I'm never telling clients what to do. But what I'm doing is I'm putting enough breadcrumbs out on the table that I'm having them follow the path and letting them come to their own conclusion. And I'll give you an example, one that we were talking about before we jumped on.
Yeah.
We practice in New York and New Jersey is two of the states we practice in. And I'm originally from New Jersey. I live in California now. But anybody who has ever taken the New Jersey Northeast Corridor train into New York City knows that it breaks down about 40% of the time. So
Mhm.
if I have a client couple who lives in Princeton, New Jersey, which is about an hour on a normal day, would be an hour from New York, no big deal on the train, easy shot. says to me, I want a 50-50 parenting plan. I said, well, okay, let me get this straight. That means you want 1 week on, 1 week off. And now you're waiting for the 5:15 out of New York. And that train is now delayed by 2.5 hours. And Johnny or Susie or Olivia is sitting on the curb at daycare because the lights are out. And guess what? 6 o'clock, that child needs to be picked up and you're nowhere in sight. That's an example of how we get people to accept the reality and explain to them this doesn't make you a bad parent. It makes you an even better parent, that you're big enough to acknowledge that as much as you want to do a 50-50 plan, that might not be realistic based on what you're doing, but you're playing an important role by being a financial caregiver, working in New York, making a good living so that your kids can have what they want. So that's a small example. And the same goes for child support. The same goes for alimony. We For example, with child support and alimony, we have clients do budgets. We have them do a joint budget that says this is what your marital spending looked like. And we have them do separate apart budgets. And the reason we do that is if you do the joint budget, and I also have them do what I call a balance sheet where they give me all their assets and liabilities.
Mhm.
If I see their budget and in my brain, I go, okay, this client couple makes $250,000 a year, and they're reporting that they're spending $5,000 a month, which is laughable here in California. But anyway, but yeah, let's say 10,000, all right, to be realistic. I'm going, it's 120K a year. They make 250. These folks should be in it's saving, no credit card debt, right? They should be in great shape. I go over to the balance sheet, 80,000 in credit card debt, nothing in retirement. I'm like, hey guys, looks like you're kind of living beyond your means because you're definitely underreporting your budget here, which means when we get into apart budgets, there's going to need to be a serious conversation about trimming back.
Yeah.
And that's when we have those conversations, right? We use information, we use numbers, and that takes the temperature out of it. It takes it away from I'm entitled to this to look, guys, here's the income you have. You can choose how you want to spend it, but here's the reality of your situation. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Makes a lot of sense. Um, have you ever worked with a couple where they started in the courts and then they go to mediation at some point? Does that happen?
Yeah, occasionally, not frequently, usually when the gloves are off, but the smart ones who realize, like, what are we doing? And they come into mediation and they'll come in and they'll be done. And sometimes take this as a compliment. When we're finished, they look at me and they're like, that's it? You sure? And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't have to be a big acrimonious knockdown, drag out battle. I've got everything I need. Here's your agreement. We draft it. They read it, go, well, this is exactly what we talked about. Yes, it is. You're right. Because you've got me. We're in real time, much like with you, John, in your profession, when
Yeah.
you're in the room and you're hearing the stories and from both people and both sides, you get both perspectives. It's not just filtered through one megaphone or the other. And then you can kind of help slowly guide the couple to agreement. And it takes that emotion out of the room and it really helps them realize what's possible versus what I'm demanding and my lawyer is demanding and I'm going to fight for.
You said, like, here's your divorce agreement. Are you doing that in the room with the clients?
So when we'll go away, we'll draft an agreement. So we draft these agreements again in a different way. My philosophy is, and I say this to basically all my clients, and some of them actually taken me up on it, which is I find as a high compliment. I say, look, I realize that I know I'm a nice guy, and I have to believe that in my heart of hearts because what I do professionally could make me a very terrible person, could make me feel like a
Sure.
terrible person. But I say, look, I realize that I'm the last person you ever want to see again. So we want to take the time to get this right. And not only do we want to resolve all the issues we face now, but I want to help you resolve all the issues that I know are coming, even though you don't. You've got a 5-year-old. Are you going to buy them a new car when they turn driving age? And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, and I'm like, well, that's going to be an argument you have 11 years from now. So let's talk about it now. And right. Oh, somebody comes home and wants to get a tattoo. What over my dead body, right? It's like, well, let's talk about that now. And all of that goes in their agreement now. So we try to telegraph everything. I then go away, draft that, give them that for review, and then they're welcome if they want to have a 1 hour, what I call review, MOU review, memorandum review session, where we can go through it in real time. I can read it to you like a bedtime story. You can ask questions just so you understand, right, the practical application of it. Most people choose not to do that with me, I believe, because it reflects exactly what it is they agreed to. And they walk out of there saying, yeah, this was fair. This worked. I got it. I mean, I understand I had to give some to get some, and that's always my philosophy, right? As a professional negotiator, you can't just keep taking. And at the end of the day, when folks look at that agreement, and I again, you getting to know me a little bit, and I've got a good sense of humor about myself, and I'll say, look, I realize this is not the most fun you've ever had. And in fact, if I can, and this is the how low the bar is, I said, if both of you walk away at the end of this mediation slightly annoyed with me, I've done my job. Okay. So if both of you look at me and go, I don't know about that guy. He kind of pissed me off sometimes, but I guess he's all right. Then I've done my job. It means you got some, you gave some, you got some, and you gave some. So
Right. So interesting. Do you find that attorneys who come to you for mediation are more difficult to work with than people who don't have legal background?
attorneys, accountants, and engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exacting
So,
or I know
love you
better.
all. Love, love, love you. But I do not need a 43-page model to explain to me how your parenting pickup and drop off times will look like. I'm glad you're excellent at coding. This is wonderful.
Right. That's funny. So you drop a divorce agreement. If someone doesn't hold by the mediation and the divorce agreement, are you kinda stuck taking them to court at that point, or do you have other options?
You know, sometimes it happens, right? And I try to frame it to client couples not as a you went back on your word, but it's really hard in the heat of a conversation to give an answer that will basically last the rest of your life. And poking fun at myself, I tend to be, because I'm a mediator, my job also is to create options when I'm working with client couples. So something as simple as, what do you want for dinner tonight, Joe, will trip someone like me up. Because what I'll do is I go, well, I had pizza last night. I could really go for some grilled chicken, and maybe I'll have a salad. And what about, and I'll change my mind 100 times. My wife is like, will you just pick something? Right. And so I frame it to people as, look, this happens. They're not trying to be a jerk about it. They just went away and finally had some quiet and said, well, if this thing is going to be, guiding our relationship for the rest of our natural born lives, then I want to make sure that it accurately represents what I need and want. And I might need to bring something up. So the good news is, in mediation, we're constantly doing that anyway. And I always say to folks, we'll typically meet every other week. That's a good pattern to meet with me, because what it does, John, is it lets you have that session, shake that session off, because it's a little challenge, get some clarity in the following week, perhaps, and I always recommend going to therapy at the same time
Yeah.
and saying, look, go talk to your therapist now, tell them what happened, tell them how you feel, let them help you reframe it, strategize, and then come back the following week and you're ready. Did I do the right thing? Did I make the decision that's best for me? Or do I need to bring it up with Joe? And I always start out my sessions by saying, okay, folks, any comments, questions, or concerns from what we talked about last time? And you'll get something. And so we get to nip it in the bud right there. We get to modify the plan. We get to change the alimony number. There might be a little acrimony in the beginning, but as I remind people, you always reserve the right to change your mind. So by the time we do get to that agreement, it's usually pretty fully cooked.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I had so many that come up and then I lose them because you're on a roll, so you'll have to forgive me.
Oh,
Um,
gosh.
with mediation, uh, do you do you find that the sessions run a typical length? Because you talked about meeting every other week. Is
Yeah.
it an hour? Is it several hours? How long, what are people actually sitting their butts in the chairs for?
I find the sweet spot is 2 hours. At first, it feels long. 1 hour is too short. 1 hour, you're just starting to get some momentum, talk about last week, framing what you're going to be doing this week. An hour and a half can work. But what I find is that more often than not, we go about an hour and a half to an hour and 40 minutes. But as your listeners will probably know, and you, John, can smile because I'm sure this is true for yourself, for your clients, is if you tell somebody an hour and a half, At the hour and 20 mark, what are they doing? Well, I got a meeting. I got Joe,
Right,
we better wrap this up. So if I tell them 2 hours and I let them out of class early, they're pleasantly surprised.
right,
And there are some folks who are really good at communication and will go the full 2 hours. And I always say, "How you feeling?" I always check in at the 1 hour mark, the hour and a half mark. "How you feeling? You want to keep going?" Or if I find a natural point to land, I'll say, "Look, we made great progress here. I know it's only been an hour and 15 minutes, but I sense a little tension is starting to creep into the room. We got what looks like a solid parenting plan. Let's take the win and we'll live, to meet another day." And I think people do appreciate that. And when you offer unlimited sessions, you can do that because now it's not like, well, you only get 3 sessions with me. And somebody says, "Well, Joe, hey man, I paid you for 3 sessions and you're cutting me out 45 minutes early." Yeah,
right.
I would be the same way. Right? I'd be like, "What are you
Sure.
doing? I don't want my value here. I want my money's worth." So I'd rather you get your money's worth through quality and through progress rather than timing and hourly. So
Yeah, for sure. So over 3 months, you're meeting, on average, obviously every case is different, but you're meeting on average every other week. So, let's say there's 12 hours of actual time or so on that average case in the sessions with you. How much time is involved for them doing the homework of making the lists, gathering documents, things like that?
yeah, so their work is up front. That's the challenge. As I joke, you're front loaded, I'm back end loaded. So when you guys are doing all the work, I'm kind of just leaning back in the chair, waiting for the documents to start flooding into our file sharing system. At the end, I'm doing all the drafting. So for them, I call it the lost weekend. It's much like doing your taxes. It's a rainy Saturday afternoon. Probably not something you're gonna be looking forward to, but you probably spend about, 2 or 3 hours collecting up documents. You probably spend another maybe 2 hours doing your budgets, another hour or 2 doing your balance sheet. So all in all, I'd say you're probably spending between 8 and 10 hours up front. And this is an important point, John, and I think this is really where mediation can also shine. We have checklists. We have forms to help you organize your thoughts. We have workbooks. We have videos that you watch on how the process works and how a topic works. All of that stuff is baked into our process. So when you do it, it's on your time, right? It's not costing you anything. It's just you're doing the work. When you work with attorneys, attorneys are getting your passwords, getting documents from you, making 3-ring binders, photocopying, distributing it out to everybody. That's billed hourly. So this is the classic, teach a woman or teach a man to fish and they eat for a lifetime, right? That's what this is. We're trying to teach you to fish so that you can do the work on your own time, on your own dime, and plus, you know better where all your bank accounts and 401k statements are than I do, right? I could ask for all your passwords and logins and try to run a credit report on you and figure out where all your credit cards are, but better that you do it and you know. So I'd give it the lost weekend, 8 to 10 hours. If you really buckle down and you really do what we ask you to do, and then invariably during sessions, right? It might be like, "Well, I think I'm going to buy the house." Great. Go out and get a real estate appraisal and, do that. There might be some of those little bits and pieces in between, but it's pretty front loaded. And once you get it done, you're pretty much set.
Yeah, I mean, look, I literally just walked a client out from the couch who's been in a contested divorce for 3 years. So the idea of spending 3 months and 20 to 30 hours total, to get it behind you is, a heck of a deal. Um,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I mean, I've heard enough. I think that you've been incredibly valuable
No,
to
thanks.
people who are considering it. Any last words or thoughts of stuff we haven't covered? Otherwise, I'll remind people how to get in touch with you.
Nothing that we haven't covered. It's just reinforcing that message that if you want to mediate, you can. You really can do this. Is it going to be easy? Is it going to be pleasant? Probably not. But as you just mentioned, somebody in a 3-year contested divorce, how painful is that? Spend a few months, get through this, rip the band-aid off, and from one professional to another in the space. This is once the divorce is over, that's when the healing begins, man. That's when the real work begins, right?
Right.
You've got years ahead of you now, hopefully not years, but months or weeks or months of really digging in and going, well, shake that off. That's not what I thought my life would look like. So the sooner you get to that point, the better off you're going to be in the long run.
Joe Dillon from Equitable Mediation. It's equitablemediation.com. He has a free consult that he pushes on the website if you're interested in getting to know him and
Yeah.
or his his team and trying to understand if this is the right decision. I really highly recommend taking that first step. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.